Go.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the January 28th, in the year of your Lord, not mine, 2014 edition of the Free Thought Forum, brought to you by the friendly folks at Pennsylvania Nonbelievers. We are a 501c3 non-profit organization dedicated to education, enlightenment, and to the separation of church and state issues. We also serve as a beacon of hope and camaraderie for those out there that believe that they are alone in a religious world. Well, they're not alone. There are millions of us. So welcome to tonight's show. I am one of the co-hosts. My name is Doug, and this is Jacob. Say hello, Jacob.
Hi.
And tonight's show, we will be discussing 2014, the year ahead, with Pennsylvania Nonbelievers. Right off the bat, we'd like to remind everyone that our first formal opening of our activities at our information booths and what we do, enter all the fairs, will be Sunday, May the 11th, on Mother's Day, and it'll be our first information booth of the season, and it will be held in York. Our normal place of residence is at the corner of West Market and Beaver Street. Just drop by and see our booth, and you can see the things that we have for sale. We have bumper stickers, pins, T-shirts, and whatever. And as always, if you really want to have a good discussion about religion, drop on by our booth. We'll be pleased to discuss everything. The only thing that we want to tell you in advance is that if you want to prove your religion, bring something other than the Bible or Bible quotes with you. Because there isn't an atheist out there that believes that the Bible is the Word of God or anything other than just words written by men with agendas. Okay, but if you've got any other thing out there other than Scripture, we'll listen to you and we'll give you a good discussion or an argument if you'd like it. So,
either that or don't come to us with the argument, where did everything come from?
Yes.
We don't know where everything came from, and neither do you.
That's right.
That's really simple. It boils down to that.
Yeah.
Even though we don't have an answer, you may not either.
What happened before the Big Bang, if you're claiming the Big Bang is real?
Yeah.
Well, how would I know? I wasn't around before the Big Bang, so I can't discuss it. Neither would Jacob.
Yeah.
All we do is that we go by scientific evidence and says that we can trace our universe back to a specific point. What happened before then? Yeah. It's a toss-up. We're still learning, and that's what we always want to do. We want, through scientific method, to learn what goes on in our universe. We want to, well, if there is a God, we'd like to see the way that he did it. But right now, we don't see any proof of the existence of any God whatsoever. Yeah, so...
Well, and then with arguments like those, trying to regress back that far, it almost implies that they don't really believe the God of the Bible. They're actually arguing for a different God than that, which sometimes the problem with arguments for the existence of God is they don't actually argue for the existence of the biblical God at all. So even if you can get yourself to deistic perspective, to go from that to something very specific as Christianity takes a lot more arguments than that.
Yeah, and also don't forget that the universe was, at least in the minds, a lot smaller then. When the early man or the people that wrote the Bible, they looked up in the sky, all I saw was dots. I mean, they could almost like go up on top of a tall mountain and touch the sky, touch the face of God, and so therefore there was no size there. Now we look, and with our science, what we have discovered, that the universe is it's endless. It has to give a whole new perspective to this God that supposedly is going to create it. Yeah, it's one thing for someone, to have created this thing that we saw as the universe, 3,000 years ago. And we go, oh yeah, okay, I can see some kind of God creating that. But now, how on earth could you imagine a God that is big enough and powerful enough to create the universe, but still be small enough to see us? It boggles your mind. But if you got proof that we don't have, we'll be pleased to listen to it. Remember that this is a call-in show, and the number is on your screen. We'll be glad to discuss anything you'd like with you. If you disagree or agree, give us a call, and we'll be glad to talk to you. Sorry, go ahead. You was in the middle.
No, I was just wondering if you wanted to move on to our topic for the day.
Well, one of the topics that we had today was, well, first let me interject something here before I get on with one of the topics. I was flipping through the channels, and of course one of the flips landed me on the 700 Club, and it was just starting up, and they were saying how the 700 Club uses technology to pray for us all. And I'm wondering how the heck that works. I mean, what station does God have his TV set tuned into? I mean, does God have cable? Does he have the 700 Club as part of his, as part of his channel? How is technology? Are they using technology to communicate with God? It just struck me as kind of funny.
I've heard even worse cases where even some televangelists have set up dial-a-prayer numbers where you actually dial the number and they have pre-recorded prayers for you, as if it's supposed to mean something. But if you read Matthew chapter 6, it's pretty clear what the Bible says prayer is supposed to be. It's supposed to be something very private, something very personal, and yet seeing some of that is just silly.
Yeah, I mean, they say that while people that pray on a street corner will be heard, God gives special credence to the prayers that are said while they are praying in their closet.
Yeah.
But still, there's so many street corner preachers that are out there. Well, you say street corner preachers. Anyone that says a prayer in public is praying on the street corner. Look at you open just about any government meeting.
Right.
Like that they've got to have their prayer beforehand. I mean, if that's not like praying on a street corner and yelling it to everyone. Dear God, we pray that you will guide us in our actions here in the Congress.
Yeah.
Oh, I hope he doesn't.
Yeah.
Because I don't know which God is going to hear them and is going to maybe act upon their prayers. I elected people, not gods.
Right.
And I would vote for someone based upon what I think of them, not what I think of their God. So.
Yeah. Well, some of them are a little crazier, and I would make an exception. Where someone was making fun of some of the, Mormon candidates, saying, "If you're capable of believing the Joseph Smith story, I don't think I want you anywhere near my politics."
Yeah. And don't you just kind of wonder?
Phone call.
Oh, phone call. Hello, caller. Welcome to Free Thought Forum. You have a question or comment?
I just have a comment. I heard the little bit you said about praying on the street corners and the meetings opening up with prayer and pretty much bashing the Christian religion. And the only thing I can say is, if you don't like it, there's planes leaving every hour for other countries. Get on one and have a good life.
Yeah, I hope God thinks the same way. Thank you. So, I wonder how many corners there are in the world where it is, prayer is outlawed. And I don't recall, anyone really saying, any human saying that, hey, don't pray on a street corner. It was Jesus that said don't do it. I mean, now Jesus is supposed to be the highest authority,
right?
And he's saying don't pray on a street corner. So I guess in essence what they're saying is that Jesus should catch the next plane out of town. Yeah, that's the way it is. So anyway, going on to one of our topics here, and that is the way that God always seems to be associated with some kind of war or strife. The people that proclaim war, or start war, will always turn around and say that God is on their side, or that God instructed them to smite someone else. I mean, it goes back into antiquity, and God always seems to be the fall guy here for starting a war, because some God whispered in their ear that he wanted these people destroyed, or those people destroyed. So you kind of wonder, well, one, why can't God smite the people that he wants to destroy himself? I mean, if God can create the universe in 6 days and everything, but then again, he did slow down a little bit round about the time of the flood, didn't he? I mean, he could, with just a flick of his wrist, saying, okay, I just want to get rid of everyone except Noah and his remarkably moral family off the face of the earth, and that's it, and we're going to start over again. But he makes it supposedly rain for 40 days and 40 nights. Why was that necessary?
Yeah, as Carl Sagan was saying in Cosmos, how ancient celestial events like comets or eclipses and so forth were often viewed as omens that a king was about to fall. So people would invade a country and overthrow a king, and it really became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I mean, you find elements throughout the Bible of that too, where it was supposed to be some sort of celestial event to foretell something. And actually, for that reason, astrology used to be a very dangerous profession, because there were so many. The king wanted you to foretell something favorable in his favor, and if it didn't happen, you tended to get executed.
Yes, especially if he had made plans or something based on your predictions, and none of it came true. But can you imagine what it must have been like for people that supposedly the astrologers that predicted the things through the stars, that missed something, like they miscalculated for an eclipse of the moon or even eclipse of the sun or something, and all of a sudden, like, in the early days before it really became a science, can you imagine what it must have been like? Oh gosh, look at it, a monster must be eating the sun, as part of it just went out, or part of it was eating the moon. And did they really think that it was going to go away forever? Can you imagine the power that some of these guys must have had to be able to turn around and say, okay, follow me and I will make the moon come back. Okay, well, okay, come back, moon. And they say, see, I will give you just a little piece of the moon. I'll give you more. And what a great gig that must have been.
It was fairly easy, and I think one of the best illustrations of how easy it is to project God into every war was actually from Napoleon, when he once made the comment that God fights on the side with a better artillery. It's a perfectly natural explanation. Whoever has the better firepower is gonna win the fight. Yet they're still gonna claim God as their as the reason they won. And I also kind of that's also kind of relevant to today's United States, where they insist that we keep the national motto, "In God We Trust," despite the fact we still spend $701 billion a year on defense, which is close to 50% of the world military budget. We have the biggest, most powerful military on the planet, yet we're still saying our trust is in God.
The United States is capable at this time of reducing the world to a burned out cinder. With all its military might, with its nuclear weapons and everything. We are, without a doubt, if not then one of the most powerful nations on Earth. And it would be virtually impossible to totally destroy us without totally destroying us, without nuking everything. There is not enough men in any army that could start on the West Coast and march across the United States and take over the country. I've always thought that, well, that is a good a reason as any for people owning guns. I mean, all those gun nuts that you complain of having out there, those would be the very people that would stop any invasion attempt right in mid stride.
Yeah, and it's if you look at the period of nuclear proliferation in this country, coming during the Cold War, which is also about that time is when we started passing, putting in God We Trust on our paper money, adding under God in the Pledge of Allegiance. Yet we're building up this nuclear arsenal to combat those godless communists, which is kind of a double, well, are we really putting our trust in God? Which
is almost an oxymoron then.
Yeah, it really is.
But you still wonder why the Sam Hill, why would we keep it? Because saying in God we trust is like a badge of honor for us. We can say that we believe in God, therefore we are better than any other nation. I mean, leaving out the fact that just about every other nation in the world also has its number of Christian Christian population. They also have quite a number of the Jewish population. I mean, the Jewish population are nothing to be sneezed at by any stretch. I mean, they're not atheists. They don't believe that a person named Jesus was truly the Son of God. In fact, it was blasphemous for anyone to say that, which of course was part of why the heck they executed him. Anyway, but then you have got the Muslims.
Yeah.
Well, okay, Muslims do accept Jesus as being a real person, except that they say that Jesus was not the Son of God. He was a great philosopher in their book. And the reason that they should follow their religion is because the late Christianity has actually turned away from God, and they in fact are more religious than quote the Christians are. I mean, heck, they get on their knees and they pray 5 times a day to their God. Now,
and they also require for you to be a Muslim, you're actually required to be able to read the Quran in Arabic, which actually is, you could argue that's actually a huge advantage over Christianity because, well, first of all, they're not even required to read the Bible, and many of them don't. But we're not even dealing in the original language, we're dealing with translations of translations. And there's a lot of signs of dishonest translating of the Bible.
Oh, yeah.
But it's important you bring up the Muslims, because if you look at the terrorist attacks of 9/11, they weren't. Even Osama bin Laden admitted that he didn't think that the attack was actually going to cause the Trade Center to collapse. He was just going after the top floors. And when it happened, he actually came out and said that the collapse was a gift from God. He credited his God for what happened, where everybody in the United States, all the major televangelists in the United States were already saying, well, this is God's punishment for us. So
they were reinforcing Osama bin Laden. They were almost traitors, really.
In a way, yeah, but it's one of those examples where a situation can be interpreted for either God, and we can't tell the difference. It's really hard to tell the difference sometimes.
Yeah, whose side is he? Is this God on?
Yeah.
And why are we trusting in him if he collapses the building, the Twin Towers?
Right.
But then again, maybe it was the devil.
Yeah.
The devil's always good.
You can always punt to that.
Yeah. It wasn't Jesus. It wasn't God. It was the devil. Well, I didn't see any signature there, like a big D on the rubble.
What's that?
I said I didn't see the devil's signature on the rubble, like a big D, a girder that was shaped in the shape of a D for devil. No, what did we find in the rubble? We found a cross, a girder, which now they say represents Christianity. That it was a sign for God. A sign for God?
That he still loves us. But apparently that love didn't last very long, because a couple of years later New Orleans got flooded. But
yeah.
But I mean, it can be interjected anyway. For example, a lot of people I know still believe that our Civil War was a punishment for slavery. And I think even Abraham Lincoln said that. But actually, I don't even know if Abraham Lincoln was an actual Christian. I think he was a deist. Because he was quoted as saying once, the Bible is not my book and Christianity is not my profession. So he may have, I don't remember him ever talking about Jesus. He talked about God a lot, which, many of our early leaders were deistic. They didn't necessarily believe in Jesus, but they definitely believed in God in some capacity, which to me is a rather odd statement, because I'm not aware of any other civilization to ever have to resort to civil war to end slavery. There have been plenty of civil wars throughout history, but rarely, if ever else, they're about is the driving factor slavery. And actually, they even go further as to say that, after the South was defeated at the Battle of Gettysburg, Lee was expecting General Meade to pursue him, so that when they had to cross, I think it was the Potomac, the South would have been defeated right there. And some people are trying to argue that, well, God didn't let the Union pursue because he wanted the war to last longer. Which to me is a little bit offensive to say that, there were 50,000 people already dead from that one battle. Do you really need it to go on that much more for someone to get the point? But it also tells them they don't really believe in free will. Yeah. And obviously, it ultimately comes down to there's always perfectly plausible natural explanations. After the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union suffered heavy losses, they were low on ammunition, and they were tired from 4 straight heavy days of fighting. And they burned, and General Meade had to burn a lot of his reserves defending the peach orchard, like when Sickle moved out from where he was supposed to. So they didn't have anybody in reserve to go after them. So it's there's always a natural explanation, but you can always project God into it. Yeah, but what I think is kind of fortunate in a way was that back in the Civil War days, the only way that they really had to wage a war was to have cannon fodder. Just throw people in the line of fire. It was a question of who had the largest number of troops with the largest number of guns and cannons and the long-range artillery. So it seems like the more that we progress in war, the less and the more technologically in how endowed we become, the less people are used
as cannon fodder, and the less that people die. I mean, fewer people died in World War One than World War Two. Fewer people died than the Korean War. You know, they didn't throw 10,000, 50,000 men fighting each other at a time like they did back in the Civil War days.
Right.
I mean, it was what a bloody mess. And now you look at what we have in Afghanistan. You start looking at our casualties. Now, true to the people whose family are suffering because they lost a loved one. Just one casualty is too many.
Right.
But if you look at the actual number that have actually died, the more people died in one day of fighting in World War II than there have been in all the years that they've had their current war in Afghanistan.
Yeah,
I mean, that's not to say that we relish the thought, because like I said, any casualty is too much. But
right, and I think the more secularized society has gotten, the more that any casualties become offensive. Like, some people have pointed that out, where, the more, even though we lost a lot fewer people in these recent wars than, say, in Vietnam, these recent wars have received almost as much protest, because I think it's more and more like, with a more religious society, it seems like wars aren't such a big deal, because they believe there's something divine behind them. Where in a more secularized society, it feels like there's a lot more value on human life, and a lot less willingness to go out there and kill just for a religious reason.
Well, also right now, though, there is no draft. As it was, people are not being inscripted.
Well, it's still on the books.
Yeah, but I mean, no high school student today, high school graduate, has to worry about coming home and finding a letter in the mail saying, congratulations, your number has come up, report to your selective service.
Right.
And so now you find that the people are talked into it by a sense of patriotism that is being espoused by the government and the...
Well, I know the church I went to growing up really did kind of exalt the status of anybody who went under the military. Like, if anybody went in the military, the entire church knew about it, because they'd put them up on stage, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think both the pastor's sons went into the military, and quite a few other people were doing that as well. Yeah, actually, a lot of my friends from that church did go into the military.
Yeah, my son just actually retired from the military with 20 years in the Army, and he did some tours in Afghanistan. Yeah, easy for me to say. Afghanistan, and in just had a senior moment. What was the other? Iraq. Yeah. So he went and he stayed in, and now he is retired. I often wondered what would have happened if I had stayed in the army. I enlisted during the Vietnam War, and I got out. But still, in the back of your mind, you sometimes will think, "Gee whiz, I wonder what would have happened if I'd have stayed in."
Right.
You know, but one thing that you do notice now that there's a lot of conflict within the armed forces about the presence of religion in the armed forces. You've got, fortunately, the what do you call it, MAPP, the military atheists, but now that they have got associations within the military for atheists, but they are being fought head on by the people within the service that actually want to keep Christianity and religion in the forefront of all armed services. And you know, they want to pray before battles and
and people who, the atheists in the military, do get looked down upon, and there are several either looked down upon or our military is very, very overtly religious. And I think that's partially because the church does exalt these, as I said before, the church does exalt anyone who goes into the military. So if it seems to be a very, very attractive profession to religion, you know, especially when, you know, especially when we've got, you know, our main enemy in the world today are, you know, Muslim extremists, you know, the Muslim, you know, religious terrorism. They feel like this is still a somewhat of a holy war to them. So, you know,
which makes them very dangerous.
Yeah, that's what makes it very dangerous. Is religious wars are not a thing of the past by any means.
No.
I mean, yeah, they were all through the Middle Ages, all throughout Europe, you know, all throughout the Middle East, through the Crusades and so forth. But you know, that's not a thing of the past by any means.
You don't. What was it? General George Patton is attributed to saying that you win a war not by dying for your country, but by making the other poor bastard die for his. But it becomes more difficult if the other person thinks that they're dying for a religious cause, and if they are going to die and go to heaven, and they're going to get 70+ virgins as a reward, plus who knows what else. I mean, boy, it's tough to compete with that if they truly believe it, that their imminent death means nothing because their Allah or their God is going to reward them in the afterlife.
And it's a comment that Sam Harris made once, where he said, your brain can compartmentalize so much that you can have the know-how to build a complex explosive device, but still think you're getting 72 virgins when you set it off. That's the scary part about the human mind.
Yeah.
But anyway, I had a little bit of a story I pulled off from a historian. This is from a speech that Richard Carrier gave called Miracles and Historical Methods. You can find it on YouTube. It's a really fascinating speech where he talks about how to evaluate miracles from antiquity. And this one is kind of along the topic of a war. When in 174 AD, Marcus Aurelius, the emperor of Rome, was fighting battles all across Europe. And during the one battle, they got into a bit of a jam where the enemy had him surrounded. His army was out of water. They were dying of thirst, and they were about to get besieged, when all of a sudden, like, a torrential rain started pouring down, started crushing their enemies, and they his army held up their shields to collect the water and drink. And they also said that balls of lightning were coming down and smashing their enemy for them. And actually, they have some pretty good evidence that something like this might have actually happened, because 2 years after the battle, Marcus Aurelius erected a column which was kind of like a picture version of what happened. And there's the section of the column that you can see a picture of it quite clearly shows this miracle, like of rain falling down, crushing soldiers, and you also see like other soldiers holding up their shields for the water. So there's very good evidence, like within a couple years of it. Now, what exactly happened was in dispute, because within just 8 years of the event happening, it was the first time we hear an explanation of what happened, and it was from a Christian source. And what they said, and this was an early Christian apologist, Apollinaris rather. And what he tried to say was that Marcus Aurelius had an entire legion of Christians under his command, and their prayers alone saved the legion. And after it, Marcus Aurelius renamed the legion to the Thundering Legion. And the first pagan version didn't actually show up until 50 years later, and we only have one text that somebody just happened to preserve to have the pagan account of it. And the pagan account was that an Egyptian sorcerer was traveling with the Roman army, summoning the Greek god Hermes, which Hermes is the messenger of Zeus in Greek mythology. And he, was the one that rained down and poured down lightning upon the enemy. So then you look at the evidence. Well, whose story might be closer to the truth? Well, if you look at the Christian story, first of all, the legion was already named the Thundering Legion about 100 years prior, at least 100 years prior to this particular battle. And actually, the idea of an entire Christian legion under Marcus Aurelius is absurd on so many levels. Like, he didn't trust Christians because they wouldn't pray to his gods, or they wouldn't do the ancient equivalent of the Pledge of Allegiance. So even a Christian in the legion, and any legion under Marcus Aurelius, is probably not going to happen. An entire legion is just utterly absurd. But at first I found the other explanation a little bit weirder, because you have an Egyptian sorcerer and a Roman legion calling down a Greek god. On the surface, that sounds really, really odd. Except the way the ancient pagans actually viewed things, some of the ancient pagans were actually somewhat universalist in a sense, where they believed everybody was worshiping the same gods, just we called them different things. For example, like Marcus Aurelius' patron god was Jupiter Optimus Maximus, who, his messenger was Mercury, which was equivalent to, and Mercury was the equivalent to Hermes. And in the same sense, in the Egyptian religion, the equivalent to Zeus was Ra, and his messenger was Thoth. And they also found an inscription within, from the legion itself, that showed at least evidence that there was a sorcerer traveling with an Egyptian sorcerer traveling with the legion within the time frame of this battle. And then they found a temple not far from the site of the battle, dedicated to Zeus. So, and it was erected within 5 years of the battle. So, this is, all the circumstances are, really pointing towards the pagan version.
Yeah, but what we do have here, though, is proof of an event.
Yeah.
But there is no real proof of the cause of that event.
Just one more point, and I'll get to that. And they also Marcus Aurelius dedicated coins between the time of the battle to the time of the temple erection, showing Hermes standing in an Egyptian temple. So it's like the pagan version is like everything's pointing towards the pagan version. Now, obviously, like, Christians are never going to believe that, the Greek god Hermes actually intervened on their behalf. What I think probably happened is, probably a summer storm saved them. Summer storms can be very violent at times, and it maybe caused the enemy to retreat, maybe gave them an advantage they wouldn't have otherwise had. But I mean, obviously, you can project whatever god into you want into that. It may have just been a sheer chance that saved them. But humans are predisposed to wanting to assign meaning to something.
Yes.
So if they got bailed out by a storm, they might say, "Wow, our God just sent the storm to us to save us," when it could have been just sheer chance. And you're not going to. It's one of those things, if the storm didn't come and they were defeated, well, then history would have proceeded differently. There was nothing to say that the world would just fly apart if that didn't happen.
You can take, proof goes both ways depending upon who is looking at it.
Right.
The old story of Joshua and the Battle of Jericho.
Right.
Okay. They marched around the city until his soldiers had blisters on their feet and stomping and everything. And then he sounded his trumpets, and the Lord made the walls fall down.
Yeah.
And it was a giant stone-walled city. Well, for the longest while, they couldn't even prove that the city of Jericho even really existed, and then through archaeology, they more or less discovered some of the remains of the wall. Then they opened it up. But one of the biggest discoveries that they had was a gaping hole in the wall that was all totally blackened, and they could see where there had been a fire there from the outside. Well, it was a well-known fact back then, in fact way before then, that if you heat rocks in a fire and then you throw water on them or throw them in the water, they go
right.
And they bring fact that's how some of the people used to originally make axes.
Right.
By splitting the rocks, by heating them and cooling them. So now they figured, okay, what happened was that they brought firewood, and there was fire. Were trees in that area, and there were also wells outside of the city, and they just built Joshua built giant fires outside the walls, and people would bring buckets of water and throw it on. The rocks would explode, and over a period of time, the walls did come tumbling down. Not the whole city, but enough where Joshua and his men come running through and captured the city. Was that God? Well,
there was another part to that story just prior to them going into the city. They crossed the Jordan, which it's supposedly parted the Jordan so that they could go across. But it's actually a well-known fact that earthquakes can cause the Jordan River to dam temporarily. And I've even seen Christian apologists admit this. And they're like, well, but God was in control of that. It's a completely natural event. Now, I'm not saying that it's impossible for God to control natural events. It's just hard to say, well, what's the difference between this being a chance encounter that meaning was projected into later and an act of God? That's the problem. You can't tell the difference.
Well, I mean, is it an act of God only when God happens to be watching? Are there ever really times when God is not watching and a natural disaster does occur? But then again, that's also presupposing that there is this guy named God that really gives a horse's patoot about what goes on down here.
Yeah, I know a lot of people tried to say that on the subject of natural disasters, like they were trying to say that New Orleans, the flood of New Orleans was, a punishment on America, or like trying to say the sinful city of New Orleans. But if you look at the damage in New Orleans, the French Quarter was the least hit. It's like what you would associate with, like the jazz and the drinking and Mardi Gras was the least hit section of the city.
Which was the closest to the water, where you'd expect the hurricane to come off anyway. So I guess you could say, because the bad people congregated there, that God could have been responsible for the thing. But then again, they were living in the danger zone.
Right. So, that's just one of many ways that, like, perfectly natural events that happen all the time can have meaning projected into them rather easily. It's not even a hard thing to do.
Well, it's for our own convenience, right?
Yeah.
If we want to prove a point or think we are proving a point, all we have to do is say, see, God was actually doing this for our benefit.
Yeah, and I kind of looked at, there was a YouTube video where someone was supposedly miraculously pulled from a sinking vehicle. And what it was, they claimed the window opened miraculously, but on the video, you see at the time they pulled the person out, the whole car was submerged in muddy water. So you couldn't tell if it was the window or the door that opened. But when they pull the person out, rescue them, and everyone's saying, well, it's a God-sent miracle. And I kind of see, well, it's possible that it was just the door that came open. But you wonder why God would rescue somebody who foolishly drove their vehicle into a rising water and then looked down at the Indian Ocean tsunami and said, nah, forget it.
Yeah.
It's that kind of wanting to project meaning into the smallest of events is easy, and to do that you have to overlook the larger events where this stuff happens. There's this idea that history had to proceed the way it did, rather than it is what it is, and whatever happens, we adapt to the changed circumstances, and just keep moving forward from there.
Like, I think it was a week or two ago, I think it was Nightline. They had a program on which I was just riveted to the screen. What they would, if I was on the edge of believing, it might have tilted me over.
Yeah.
Okay. And there was this woman. She was decided that she was going to drive, like 4 hours. She was visiting someplace, and she was going to drive home. And she's driving in her car, and there's this gentleman in like a tow truck that's going down the super highway. She is driving down about 65 miles an hour, and a tractor trailer truck somehow goes over, hits a car just as they cross over a bridge. And it was like a 4-lane bridge separated. The tractor trailer took the top of her car and crushed it along the top of the bridge, and then proceeded to go over and down between the two bridge abutments. And the woman that was driving the thing, was presumed to be dead. If you looked at this car, I've seen many pictures of wrecks.
Right.
You couldn't tell what kind of car this was. All it was just a crumpled wreck. And anyway, make a long story short, here, as one of the guys from the tow truck was approaching, after he'd called 911 and reported that, send a coroner like that, he heard a voice yelling out, "Help, help," like that, and a woman and her 2 daughters were still alive in this thing, and there was a little piece of glass from where the windshield is, and all you could do is see her face in it going, help me, and she's just wrapped in steel.
2 minutes.
Right.
And the series of events that led up to her rescue was truly phenomenal. I mean, the odds of it ever happening were truly amazing.
Yeah.
But
1.5 minutes.
They did. They saved her, and I'm quite sure a lot of people would have looked at that and said God was watching over her.
Yeah.
Whereas I look at it and say that it really was a series of very, very lucky events.
Well, we have to realize that with the thousands upon thousands of miles of roads, with all kinds of drivers, rare things happen all the time.
Yeah.
It's in the margin of statistics that kind of series of events can unfold. But in the last minute, I just want to say one thing. Is there one enemy that God can't defeat?
I don't know. Is there?
Well, according to the book of Joshua, he can't defeat people who are using chariots of iron.
Oh.
It says Joshua defeated the people in the hills, but he couldn't defeat the people in the valley, for they had chariots of iron, even though God was with him.
I'll make sure I get in my chariot of iron. I'd like to tell you that the next show will be Tuesday, the 11th of February, followed by the next show on the 25th of February, which is Tuesday. We thank you very much for tuning in. And as they say in the cartoons, that's all, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Take care. Say goodbye.
Yeah.